Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. It's going to be on the impact of language. My name's Lucy Leonard. I'm an occupational therapist, first and foremost, and I'm also clinical director with the OT service. I've been an occupational therapist for 24 years this year and have worked in local authorities, NHS trusts, and more latterly in the private sector. But I still work within local authorities now, assisting with managing waiting lists. So the learning objectives, which you might have already seen, which were sent around in the email, are to reflect on the use of common clinical or therapeutic language, to discuss some connotations of words such as the word resilience, the word bariatric, and a few others to understand the impact of these types of words on our clients, and to delve into connotations, relationships, and psychological or social impacts of language. Now, just a bit of a disclaimer at this point that this is a time-limited webinar. I've got about 35 minutes to speak, allowing for a little bit of time for questions. Language is a huge topic. Everybody has opinions on it. So in this webinar, what I've done is I've taken a few bits of language that we use as occupational therapists or we might come across. And I just wanted to get you to think and get you to reflect on whether you use these words and how you use them. So it's a bit of a disclaimer to say that I'm not going to cover everything. The other thing is that language isn't always about facts. It's about opinions and views. So again, it is about getting you to go away maybe and reflect and maybe pick up some of these themes and have conversations with colleagues and within your teams and just in your supervision, just to reflect on your use of language. So language is really important in healthcare. It supports effective communication between occupational therapists and the people that we work with. And then in that first bullet point, when I was writing it, I was thinking, there you go, there's a real quick example of the use of language. Patients, clients, service users, we all have an opinion on which is the best to use. We all have a favourite, maybe. We all feel strongly that people shouldn't be called patients anymore because it's a very passive term. They should be service users. And then other people will say, well, that makes them sound like they're just using the service. So even just right at the beginning of the presentation, there's an example there of the use of language. I think it's important to ask people about language as well and the types of language that we are using, because it helps to foster those relationships. We need to ensure that patients understand their diagnoses and their treatment plans and any advice that we're giving them. So the impact of language is really important when we're speaking to maybe a layperson who doesn't understand some of the terms that we may use when we're speaking to colleagues. So for example, I wouldn't necessarily talk to a person that I was working with about occupational performance, but I might discuss that with a colleague. And actually, use of correct language can promote patient safety. It reduces misunderstandings. So we have to be really clear in our use of language. And it fosters trust and again, that therapeutic relationship that we need to develop with people, sometimes very quickly, to make sure that we're going to be able to work with them effectively. And language is absolutely crucial in notes. And we're all under time constraints. And I know sometimes notes get written very quickly. And sometimes we tend to use the same type of language in our notes very, very quickly. I'm going to use an example, not from occupational therapy, but something that I came across a lot, less so recently, but going into patients' homes, I would look in their care plan from the local care agency that was going in to support that person. And I don't know whether you've seen this, but I used to come across this acronym AWOL. Now, in general English language use, AWOL means absence without leave, or he's gone AWOL, he's disappeared. And I subsequently found out that AWOL stood for all's well on leaving. And that would be something that would be written in the notes at every single visit. And I think that's important to get yourself to just think about what maybe you write in your notes on a regular basis, and actually just question how that might be interpreted by somebody else. So I've got some examples of why language is crucial in notes. Now, another disclaimer here, this is taken just from the internet. I was looking for some examples of patient notes where things have been written that weren't quite right or could be interpreted differently. So I haven't seen any of these in any patient notes. It's taken from online. So the first one is, patient has chest pain if he lies on his side for over a year. So how could that be interpreted? It's sometimes it's about grammar and the use of full stops and commas and things like that. By the time he was admitted, his rapid heart had stopped and he was feeling better. Something else, if somebody's heart stopped, how can they be feeling better? Patient was released to outpatients without dressing. And on the second day, the knee was better. And by the third day, it had entirely disappeared. So they're just some quick examples of some very strange ways of writing notes, but how things can be misinterpreted. Now, I don't normally use Khloe Kardashian in my presentations. However, when I am planning for a webinar to deliver content, I'll often go away and reflect on the topic. I'll go away and speak to colleagues, to occupational therapy friends. And I was chatting with one of my colleagues about the use of language. And for some reason we got chatting, and she said, I've got a brilliant thing that might fit with your webinar. And it was this picture of Khloe Kardashian, which she sent me on WhatsApp. I think this is taken from Instagram. And it says, if I'm in a coma, I'm still getting my nails done once a week, and that's in my will. Now, I just kind of want you just to hold that for a minute. Just hold that thought of what she's saying. If she's in a coma, she still wants to get her nails done, and that's in her will. Okay. And let me move on now to the word independence. So bear in mind what Khloe Kardashian has just said. I'm going to move on to the word independence. And again, just have a little reflection here on yourself and how you describe occupational therapy to other people. Do you use the word independence? So when somebody says, what's an occupational therapist? Do you say, we help to make people independent? Is that one of the ways that you describe what occupational therapists do? And again, whilst researching for this presentation, I found a job advert for an occupational therapist. And as part of this sort of blurb, not in the job description, but as part of the blurb in the advert, it said, promoting and supporting people to keep them independent, resilient, and well. So I thought those words were really interesting, a really interesting use of the word independent, resilient, and well. And I'm now going to reflect on those words. So what do occupational therapists do? And this is from the Royal College of Occupational Therapy. And they say that an occupational therapist helps people of all ages overcome challenges, completing everyday tasks or activities, or what we call occupations. Now, I'm not going to apologise for reading out my slides here, because I think this is really important to go through. what the Royal College of Occupational Therapy says occupational therapists do. So we overcome challenges completing everyday tasks or activities. Occupational therapists see beyond diagnoses and limitations to hopes and aspirations, which I absolutely love. So when we're working with people, we should be asking, what are your hopes and aspirations or your goals? They look at relationships between the activities you do every day, which are your occupations, alongside the challenges you face and your environment. Fair enough. Then occupational therapists create a plan of goals and adjustments targeted at achieving a specific set of activities. The plan is practical, realistic, and personal to you as an individual to help you achieve the breakthroughs you need to elevate your everyday life. And that was one of the themes around OT week, wasn't it? It was about elevating your everyday life. The support can give people a renewed sense of purpose. It can also open up new opportunities and change the way people feel about the future. So that's a summary from the Royal College of OT about what occupational therapists do. What I'm going to ask now is, can anybody spot the word independent or independence in there? You can't spot it because it's not there. So just bear that in mind. And then this is from the World Federation of Occupational Therapy, and it's about what occupational therapists do. And again, I'm going to read this to you. Occupational therapy is a client-centered health profession concerned with promoting health and well-being through occupation. The primary goal of occupational therapy is to enable people to participate in the activities of everyday life. Occupational therapists achieve this outcome by communities to enhance their ability to engage in the occupations they want to do, need to, or are expected to do, or by modifying the occupation or the environment to better support their occupational engagement. And again, I'm going to ask the question, where is the word independence in that definition from the World Federation of Occupational Therapy? And the answer is, it's not there. So how many of you are using the word independent or independence to describe occupational therapy, but actually the Royal College of Occupational Therapy in the UK and also the World Federation do not use that word at all? So just going back to Khloe Kardashian, who I didn't ever think would be able to help me deliver a presentation. Well, let's think about Khloe Kardashian for a minute. And I must admit, I don't follow the Kardashians, but I know a little bit about them. So I'm sure you've heard of Khloe and the family. And what do we know about Khloe? Well, what we might know about Khloe is Khloe's values and what's important to her. And clearly, in this one little quote, what she's trying to say is what's really, really valuable to her. If her choices are taken away from her and she's not able to choose the occupations or the activities that are important to her, then personal care is something that is hugely important to her. And how she looks and how she feels about herself is massively important to her. So just that one small quote from Khloe Kardashian is telling us something about her and her values. So just have a think for a moment about people who haven't got the ability to make those choices for themselves. If you're in a coma, you're not going to be able to be independent in any of your activities. However, you still hold, as a person, you hold values. And we work with a range of people, and sometimes those people can't make choices. And actually, despite all the intervention that we may provide them with, all the support and the guidance and the rehabilitation and the intervention, they're never going to be independent in their activities. So, for example, a person with dementia who, when they were, before they had symptoms, it was really important to them to have their hair done nicely. And they always went out with incredible hair and make sure that there was no grey and it was styled beautifully. But as the disease progresses, that person may not be able to address those things. So it's important to understand what was important to somebody before they had before their cognition was impaired, and then we can look at what's important to that person and how we're going to address those things, or how we're going to support that person to have the same values that they had before the disease. So Chloe here, even though it seems quite a throwaway quote, I think it's really important for us as occupational therapists to reflect on, well, actually, we can't always make people independent, but we can understand them as occupational beings, as individuals, as humans with a history, a background, passions, hopes, aspirations. Those words are really, really important, but we can't always make people independent. So thinking about independence, what is actually wrong with interdependence? That's what I want you to reflect on. How does this link with life roles? So, for example, a husband and wife who've been together 60 years have a level of interdependence. You know, they rely on each other for things. So complete independence isn't always a great thing and is not always necessarily what somebody's goal is. And again, just have a little reflect for a few seconds on, who do you rely on? It doesn't mean that you're not independent and you need fixing if you rely on people. I mean, I rely on friends and family, and if I need advice, I'll pick up the phone and people help me with things. And I told you about the example of chatting with my network of occupational therapy colleagues. So I rely upon a lot of people. I'm not completely independent, and I don't think that needs fixing. And actually, if the goal is independence, think about the impact of being completely independent on energy levels. So if you have a certain amount of energy that you can expend in the day, where do you want to use that energy? Would it be undertaking activities such as toileting and getting to the toilet and being independent and using all your activity? Or actually, would we want to expend that energy on more meaningful activities such as leisure and sitting and around and being and chatting with friends, or going out for a walk with the dog? So it's important to get that balance between energy use on meaningful activities and not just purposeful activities where we might be able to be independent. So just moving forward, I think we just need to reflect on the word independent and think about how much we use it in our notes and maybe our reports, and think about, would participation and engagement be a better word to use? And again, just having a look at the legislation and how that works. The focus really should be on supporting people to live as independently as possible, for as long as possible. It says that in the Care Act. So the word independence is used in the legislation. And it's critical to the vision of the Care Act that the care and support system works actively to promote wellbeing and independence. So the word independence is used in the legislation. And similarly, in Wales, it doesn't place much emphasis on the word independence, but it says that the Wellbeing Wales Act will transform the way social services delivered, promoting people's independence to give them stronger voice and control. So the word is used in the legislation. And we have our occupational therapy code of conduct. And in there, it says you empower people to maintain their health and well-being and manage their own occupational needs wherever possible, which is alluding to a bit of independence there. Okay. Just touching on the word resilience. I think this is a word that is heard more and more often at the moment. It's not a word that I think is hugely positive. We are often told that people need to be more resilient, that children should be more resilient. But actually, I think the word resilience, again, can be a negative, can have negative connotations. And I just went online and I just found this word resilience, and it's everywhere. It's in all sorts of different industries, and it's used a lot. And I just wanted to reflect on this word, because sometimes I think we should be making people more resilient. So when I looked at the definition of the word resilience, I found the following. So resilience is making lemonade from lemons, adapting to difficult or life-changing situations, withstanding adversity, gratitude during difficult times, which I felt really uncomfortable with that particular term, composure, working through emotional pain and suffering, bouncing back. So the word resilience, and this is why I was trying to explain that it does have quite a lot of negative connotations. We shouldn't be expecting people to give gratitude during difficult times, to work through emotional pain and suffering. Sometimes things get on top of people. Sometimes it's very, very difficult to be resilient. And I think we need to recognize that people are allowed to not be resilient. But it's about working with that person, finding out what their goals are, and helping them to undertake those tasks, those occupations that are important to them, whilst recognizing that not everybody can be resilient at all times. And I found this quote about resilience, and they referred to it as a resilience fad, which I thought was quite interesting. The resilience fad, in some ways, reinforces the idea that people today lack the hardiness of their forebears, and that this is somehow their fault. And during the pandemic, around 2020, 2021, this word resilience seemed to come up more and more. And actually, a lot of people struggled to get through those times. And I think that's okay. I think it's okay to say, I'm not feeling massively resilient at the moment. So I just wanted to touch on that and get you to reflect on that word. So if we can't make people resilient, maybe we can make them safe and independent. So there's that word again. So how many of you in your notes, when you're looking at something like transfers, will write safe and independent in transfers? The client was safe and independent getting on and off the sofa. This client was safe and independent getting on and off the toilet. The client is safe and independent undertaking toilet hygiene activities. It's a word that we use quite a lot. I come across it a lot in notes from other occupational therapists. But actually, if we look at the word safe, we need to understand what that word means. And safe, the word safe, the dictionary definition of safe, means free from harm or risk, or protected from or not exposed to danger or risk, not likely to be harmed or lost. So what I want you to do now is reflect on whether the people that you work with are ever free from harm or risk. can you ever say a transfer is safe and independent? Because the word safe means free from harm or risk. And so that word safe, along with independent, which we've touched on, is thrown around in notes quite often. But actually, I don't think there's much thought going into that word safe, because I don't think anybody, regardless of whether they have a health challenge, an injury, or an illness, can ever be safe in what they do. And actually, I think what occupational therapists are brilliant at is managing risk and encouraging positive risk taking. Achieving complete safety is actually really, really challenging, because life just involves a level of risk and uncertainty. And absolutely nobody can ever be completely immune to all hazards and risks. But we know as occupational therapists that we can take certain steps to improve safety and reduce risk in daily activities and occupations. So if you're using the word safe in your notes, just have a little think about what other words might be a little bit more appropriate in that sense. And actually, are you making anybody safe? So I think if we can get away from using safe and independent, and again, this is just an opinion of mine, this isn't a fact, but looking at the word safe and how we're on a little bit of dodgy ground if we use that word, and also the word independence, can we swap that for more occupation-focused language, such as using optimal occupational performance? Because occupational performance means that ability to choose, organise, and perform meaningful occupations. And I think that fits a lot better with the work that we do with people. So just thinking about being in the bathroom and undertaking those occupations such as toileting, showering, access in and out of a bath, cleaning teeth, applying makeup, all of those things that we do in the bathroom, maybe even getting dressed if people get dressed in the bathroom. We can't necessarily make people safe, but our intervention can optimize their occupational performance. And whether that's with the provision of a wash-dry toilet, whether that's adapting the environment to make it more accessible and inclusive, so the design of the bathroom more inclusive, it's more appropriate for an occupational therapist to say that they're optimizing occupational performance rather than making them safe and independent. So hopefully that's just got you to reflect a little bit on the types of language that you might be using in your notes and when you're working with people. And I know that the College of Occupational Therapy has produced a document about risk-taking in occupational therapy. And if you haven't seen it, if you go on the website and have a look, it's really, really helpful, because I think that's something that we do really well. So just quickly touching on a few other bits of language that we might use in our notes, because obviously this is very time limited, but just to get you to reflect. So when we talk about feeding or dressing or toileting, they're quite passive terms, and it doesn't make it sound like the person is an active participant in that activity or that occupation. So it might be better to, instead of using feeding, it might be better to use phrases like supporting or helping a person to eat rather than feeding, because I think they are quite passive and passive terms, and don't put the person at the heart of that language use. And it's a few years ago now, I delivered a presentation for Closomat. It was a webinar, and I don't doubt that it's available on YouTube. And we talked about plus size clients, and it was an entire webinar talking about working with plus size people. And in that webinar, I touched on the language used to describe plus size people and how that's changed over time, and how it's really important to use the right language. And I also touched on the fact that when I've worked with different people, they use some of these terms to describe themselves. So, for example, I would go and see somebody, and a plus size lady, and she would describe herself as curvy, which was absolutely fine. And that's the language that we both used. Some other people would just say, I'm fat, but I don't feel comfortable using that particular word, even if the client would use it. So I would just stick to something like plus sized. And in that webinar, I used the word bariatric, and you hear this sometimes used about bariatric clients, but bariatric is actually quite a medical term, and should only really be used to describe equipment that we use. So it shouldn't really be used to describe people, bariatric clients. And the other thing that was brought up in that presentation was around the word obese. And you know how you can, there's a chart, isn't there? And you look at somebody's height and their weight, and you can work out whether they're underweight or obese or morbidly obese. And I said that was a factual way of describing somebody. And that was actually challenged, and somebody said, that isn't necessarily factual, because everybody can be different sizes, and you can have a rugby player who would be severely, morbidly obese. So absolutely, I recognize that fact. So it's important when we're using language, especially around plus size people, just to reflect on what we're saying and how we're saying it and how we're using it. The World Obesity Federation has put a little bit of guidance about working with plus size people, and they say that we should be using people first language. So that's a person with a health condition. Adopt positive language about obesity and people with obesity. And that's why you prefer to use the word plus size, because I think it is quite a positive term. To avoid language that's derogatory or pejorative. To use easy to understand language to illustrate that obesity is actually a health condition. And avoid the use of language that implies individual blame, for example, overeater, which is a term that I really dislike, because that's it implying that person's to blame for their condition. So it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, really, of language. But I very much want you to go away and reflect on some of this language that we've talked about. So have a think about what you're using in your patient notes. Are you using the word safe and independent? Are you using more occupation-focused language? And what I often say when I'm speaking with occupational therapists up and down the country, which I often do, is don't be frightened to use occupation-focused language in your notes. We need to take that word occupation and hold it really close to us and own it, and use it in our notes to describe what we're doing. Sometimes I will read a report written by an occupational therapist, and the word occupation doesn't appear once in that report. So I think we need to reflect on the language that we use, not only reflect on it, but also pick it up and own it, and use the word occupation throughout our intervention and our notes. I just used this. I found this on the internet. It was quite funny. It hit me with the paperwork, and it was just a little funny way of just summarizing really about when you're asking somebody to do something, do they fully understand what you've asked them to do? So when we're working with clients, patients, service users, and there's that use of language again, are we using the most appropriate language to work with them? Are we asking what their goals are, what their hopes and aspirations are? That should be something that we're doing right at the beginning when we meet somebody, finding out what's important to them and what their hopes and aspirations are. And if we're not able to speak to somebody about what their hopes and aspirations are, then we can speak to their family members and say, what are their values? What's their culture? What's important to them? If we're working with children, we can work who aren't able to communicate and may have not been able to communicate from birth. We need to find out from their family what their values are, what's important to the family, what are the family goals for that child. And I think we need to get away from making independence the focus of our intervention and recognize that regardless of what we do, we're not going to make people independent all of the time. And that's okay, because a level of interdependence is important for human beings. And actually, by the provision of equipment and adaptations, sometimes you're not going to make people independent, but you're going to optimize their occupational performance. So that's the end of the presentation. I've got some references and we should have time for some questions.